You filed a homeowner's claim, your adjuster inspected the damages, and then you received a letter in the mail saying your claim was denied. That doesn't always mean it's over. Welcome back, I'm the insurance lady, and today we're going to talk about claim denials. I'll explain what a denial actually is, some common reasons that your claim could be denied, and what your practical next steps are if you receive a denial in the mail. First, let's talk about what a denial actually is. It isn't simply that the insurance company doesn't want to pay or won't pay. The insurer has to identify the applicable policy language and the supporting facts for their coverage determination. And a denial isn't a below deductible letter. Those are two separate things. If you receive a below deductible letter, that means that there is a covered loss and that the damages are below your deductible, meaning the damages are covered under the policy, but the estimated cost to repair or replace those damages falls below your policy deductible, and so no claim payment can be made. A denial is, however, whenever a claim or part of a claim contains damage that is not covered under the policy. There's a couple types of denials. There's a full denial, which means that all of the damages that were found under the claim were not covered under the policy. An example would be if flood causes damage to your house and you file a homeowner's claim and there's no other damages from any other perils, so all the damage is resulting from that flood, then none of the damages would be covered because if you recall from our first video, debunking insurance myths, flood insurance is not covered under homeowners. You need a separate policy for that. So if all of the damages resulted from flood, then that would mean that all of the damages would fully be denied because there's no coverage for flood. A partial denial, however, is whenever coverage exists, but maybe there's an item or a causation that isn't covered within that claim. An example would be if you have a supply line that fails from wear and tear and it allows water to leak, causing damage to your home. You actually have two separate causations going on there. You've got two perils in that one claim. So the first one is wear and tear to the supply line, and the second one is the water damage to your house, and that's referred to as accidental discharge. So when evaluating that claim's coverages, they would first need to ask if there's coverage for the supply line, and then they would ask if there's coverage for the water damage. So if you receive a partial denial in that instance, it would probably say something along the lines of, the supply line failed to wear and wear and tear is specifically excluded under the policy, so the cost to repair or replace that supply line specifically wouldn't be covered. But if your policy does provide coverage for accidental discharge, then that would mean the ensuing water damage would be covered. Another example of a partial denial is if a windstorm passes through and your roof suffers very minor damage from wind, maybe in the form of a few shingles have lifted up, and then wind-driven rain has entered into the dwelling and caused damage to the interior of your home. If your policy states that wind-driven rain is only covered if a storm-created opening is the cause for the water entering your house, and in this instance, there is no storm-created opening, then the minor wind damage to the roof might be covered, but that ensuing water damage from that wind-driven rain to the interior may not be if there's no storm-created opening. And some policies do require a storm-created opening in order for the wind-driven rain damage to be covered, and some don't require it. So have a look at your wind and hail peril in your policy and see if yours requires that storm-created opening or if you're able to get coverage for wind-driven rain even without that storm-created opening. You'll want to read the actual coverage determination that's written in the denial. And I get it, not all denials are written great. They're not in the best format and they're not always clear. But for example, whenever we have to draft a denial, whenever a claim is being denied by the carrier, ours will outline all the information that you need. It'll identify what was damaged. It'll identify the cause of the damage, and it'll also identify if that coverage exists. And if your denial that you received in the mail doesn't have that information, ask for clarity, ask for clarification. You can go back, ask for specifics, to get that information that you need. Now let's review the common reasons that you may have received a denial. The first reason is that the cause of loss isn't covered. Homeowners insurance doesn't cover every single cause of loss. As we know, homeowners insurance doesn't provide coverage for flood. Your policy may not provide coverage for earth movement or settling, wear and tear. Just because damage exists doesn't mean that coverage exists. Reason number 2 is wear and tear and deterioration. These are maintenance issues. They're expected byproducts of ownership and regular use. They're also expected byproducts of exposure to the everyday elements. If you have a 20-year-old roof and a storm comes through, you could have 2 different types of damage. You could have interior damage from wind-driven rain, and you could have damage to your roof due to wear and tear or deterioration. That can involve different coverage questions. Your roof may have damage in the form of granular loss, pot nails, unsealed shingles, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was caused by wind. Those things speak to wear and tear. The storm didn't cause the damage, but water was allowed to penetrate the interior of your house. We just discussed earlier about how some policies require that storm-created opening. Some policies don't. So in this particular instance, if your policy does not require the storm-created opening, then the interior damage could be covered from that wind-driven rain if there's coverage for wind-driven rain. However, the damage to your roof is the result of wear and tear and deterioration and not necessarily the windstorm itself. Reason number 3, and we see this all the time, long-term and repeated water leaks. A pipe bursting is a sudden and accidental occurrence. It's a one-time event. But if you have a pipe leak that's been ongoing for months and it's just been trickling out, and then finally you see damage after a while, you can see like some water staining. That is a repeated and ongoing occurrence. And so that's not a singular one-time event where water discharges and then it's done. The adjuster has to identify when the damage started, what caused it, how long it's been going on. They have to identify if it was hidden, because some policies will specifically say that an ongoing leak is not covered even if the leak is hidden to the policyholder. But some policies will say that an ongoing leak will not be covered unless it's hidden to the policyholder. So it is important to know that distinction, and you should definitely reference your policy to see if your policy provides that type of a coverage or if it would exclude coverage from an ongoing leak even if it is hidden. The adjuster also has to determine what steps were taken after you discovered that leak. If it was sudden and accidental, but you failed to mitigate the water that was all over the house, or you failed to protect your property from further damage, or make that spot repair to that supply line, or at least turn that supply line off, then even though your policy may have originally provided coverage for that sudden and accidental leak, your failure to protect your property from further damage could actually end up impacting the coverage decision. Reason number 4 is a lack of proper documentation. If you have few or no photos, then the carrier isn't able to confirm that damage existed. If the materials were discarded before the carrier had an opportunity to inspect, then they're unable to determine the materials that were in place before the loss. If you don't have an inventory of your personal property, then the carrier is unable to determine what items were damaged. If your repairs were completed before the carrier has an opportunity to inspect, or if you fail to submit the repair documentation, possibly there's an unclear timeline. If you're unable to establish the order of events of when this occurrence happened, then these are all examples of insufficient documentation. If you must, and I mean must, discard or make repairs or temporary repairs, document. Make sure you have all the documentation so that the carrier has everything they need to evaluate the claim. Reason number 5, policy conditions weren't met. Your policy outlines your duties after loss. Policies can vary with this type of language, so make sure you reference your policy to see what your duties are. It's located in the conditions section of your policy. Some examples would be you have to provide prompt notice of the claim. You have to protect your property from further damage. You have to cooperate with the investigation. You have to provide the requested documentation. You have to prepare the damaged inventory of all your property. And you have to allow inspection. You have to give the carrier an opportunity to inspect and confirm that the damages exist and their cause. The final reason we'll go over today is that the carrier disputes the causation of the loss. If you file a claim for storm damage to your roof, but the inspection reveals your roof is actually damaged from wear and tear instead of winds or hail, then that creates a disagreement regarding the causation of the loss. Engineers are sometimes used to confirm the cause of loss. They can confirm whether it was wind or if it's wear and tear, but they can be expensive. A lot of contractors and PAs, and not all of them, but a lot of them do call everything wind and hail, even if it's wear and tear. So you want to make sure that you're setting realistic expectations. Did damaging hail come through your area recently or within the policy period? And by damaging hail, I mean hail large enough to actually impact your roof. If hail came through but it was only pea size, it's likely not going to have impacted your roof. You would expect to see maybe 3/4 inch, inch and a half. That size hail is typically what we see is large enough to actually make an impact on your roof. So ask yourself, did damaging hail come through the area recently? High winds, did you have a high windstorm come through recently? Have you found shingles in your yard? Are there any other indicators that you could potentially have damage from wind or hail to your roof? Use your best judgment. If a contractor is knocking at your door and they're saying, oh, I can see hail damage just from down here, can I go ahead and get up there and inspect your roof? And you know that there's been no damaging hail events, there's not been high winds, you haven't seen any signs that could point to potential damage to your roof, you should be picking up on some of these red flags. And if he wants to inspect your roof and you're happy for him to do it, by all means, let him do that. But I would suggest you oversee that inspection, because if all signs are pointing to there's been no weather event that could have possibly damaged my roof, this does happen. And I will preface this, it is very rare. So I don't want, anyone to get freaked out over it. It is rare, but it does happen. Contractors will knock door to door, and even though there's not been a hail event, and then they get on your roof, no one's really watching them, and then all of a sudden you've got strikes on your roof, and they're manufactured. And that can be manufactured in a number of ways, possibly with a hammer or an other hand tool or item where they're striking your roof. And if that happens, and it's found to be that the damage to your roof is manufactured, your policy wouldn't cover that. But more so, your claim would be denied, and also you've now got damage to your roof. And I can bet you that contractor is going to be nowhere to be found whenever you're trying to get him to come and fix the damage that he caused. Like I said, it doesn't happen a lot. It's very rare, but we have seen it happen before. And so I just want to point that out. If you're, picking up on a lot of red flags, there's been no wind events, no weather events, and all of a sudden, they're claiming that they can see it from the ground, I would say, okay, well, show me, try to get a little bit more information and at least watch him do that inspection so that there's no way that he can damage your roof and then leave you with a damaged roof. Because the person who's going to be affected by that at the end of the day is you. So what do you do if you receive a denial? First, you want to make sure that you're reading the denial completely. Read the whole letter. Try to identify what the reason for the denial is. If you can't find that, then ask for clarity. Find the cited policy provisions. Compare the carrier's findings to what actually happened. Organize your photos, invoices, documentation, and make sure that you've already provided that to the carrier. If you haven't, you've got to get that over to them so that they can review it. Ask the carrier for clarification on anything that doesn't make sense. And follow your policies, procedures for dispute or reviewing disputes and your local rules. Keep in mind, as we've discussed in our appraisals video, appraisal is a dispute resolution process that is meant for disputes arising for amount of loss, not coverage. So it won't be sufficient for you to, resolve any coverage disputes or causation disputes. And when appropriate, seek professional advice or professional assistance if you have a legitimate dispute. Denials can be frustrating and intimidating, but I hope this video has given you a roadmap on how to understand your denial and also what your next steps are in the event that you receive one. Like and subscribe if you found this video useful, and tune in next week where I continue to provide insider tips and knowledge and help you get the most out of your insurance policy.